Yo, what up, what up, what up? Y'all know the deal, man. Like and share, like and share, like and share, so we get this thing out everywhere. Just anywhere in the world it could be, but just show you right here with me, the BABGOG. And I appreciate you pull up on me. What's going on, man? Shout out to everybody in the building. Yeah, man. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Huh? Mr. Rapture. Whoa, whoa, whoa. No, ma'am. I definitely didn't do that. You still here too. So hey, if I missed it, you missed it. What's going on, man? Shout out to everybody, man. Yeah, yeah, we're gonna do this, man. So hey, I wanted to I'll talk about a couple things or whatever. And so I wanted to I guess start like a book review of sorts, especially being that now um a lot of the conspiracy things are, coming to fruition and being proven right. I didn't want to I want to start with something that's, a quicker read and then get into, more in depth in um larger volumes, pause, right? I didn't want to start out with Behold a Pale Horse. That's that's pretty in depth. Even though I think that's one of the staples, one of the most important staples of any conspiracy theorist readings, right? But yeah, man, we talked about this. I alluded to it a couple of times, and I found the audiobook on YouTube. So I think we just going, just some light, go through a couple of chapters, and of course I won't do it every single tinfoil, but I'll say at least so we can get through the whole thing. Because let me see, how many things does this have? Yeah, hold on. Let's go a little bit, but we can start it, and we'll jump around to where we need to, right? But either way, man, the creature from Jekyll Island. All right. Um, Again, when I started learning all these different things and so on and so forth, that there really isn't any money. Okay. When they stopped the gold standard, right? When they stopped the gold standard, that was the end of money. All right. Federal Reserve notes aren't money. I think if you look in the Constitution, the only real money are coins, right? Coins printed by the well, I don't know, that'll be the Federal Reserve or the Mint or whatever, but coins. But paper money is not money. All right. It's a promise to pay. Okay. And what Edward Griffin does, he tells the story about how the plan came together in order to finally get America on the Federal Reserve. Okay. Y'all have heard things, so on and so forth, bro. The Federal Reserve, once that the United States got involved with that, you start seeing a lot of turmoil. And if you coincide a lot of the wars and things that occurred, you'll come to find out it was due to um, outside forces trying to force America onto or keep them in the Federal Reserve, right? So we'll get into it, man. So
Introduction. Does the world really need another book on the Federal Reserve System? I have struggled with that question for several years. My own library is mute testimony to the fact that there has been no shortage of writers willing to set off onto the dark forest to do battle with the evil dragon. But for the most part, their books have been ignored by the mainstream, and the giant snorter remains undaunted in his lair. There seemed to be little reason to think that I could succeed where so many others have failed. Yet, the idea was haunting. There was no doubt in my mind that the Federal Reserve is one of the most dangerous creatures ever to stalk our land. Furthermore, as my probing brought me into contact with more and more hard data, I came to realize that I was investigating one of the greatest whodunits of history. And to make matters worse, I discovered who did. Someone has to get this story through to the public. The problem, however, is that the public doesn't want to hear it. After all, this is bad news, and we certainly get enough of that as it is.
Appreciate you. $500 fine. You got Treasury. That's what it is. So Treasury takes care of like printing coins. That's what I was trying to think. I was thinking of like the mint, the U.S. mint. That's what I was thinking about. I think it's in Fort Knox and all that good shit.
Another obstacle to communication is that this tale truly is incredible, which means unbelievable. The magnitude by which reality deviates from the accepted myth is so great that, for most people, it simply is beyond credibility. Anyone carrying this message is immediately suspected of paranoia. Who will listen to a madman? And finally, there is the subject matter itself. It can become pretty complex. Well, at least that's how it seems at first. Treatises on this topic often read like curriculum textbooks for banking and finance. It is easy to become ensnared in a sticky web of terminology and abstractions. Only monetary professionals are motivated to master the new language, and even they often find themselves in serious disagreement. For example, in a recent letter circulated by a group of monetary experts who for years have conducted an ongoing exchange of ideas regarding monetary reform, the editor said, quote, "It is frustrating that we cannot find more agreement among ourselves in this vital issue. We seem to differ so much on definitions and on really an unbiased, frank, honest, correct understanding of just how our current monetary system does function." End quote. So why am I now making my own charge into the dragon's teeth? It's because I believe there is a definite change in the wind of public attitude. As the gathering economic storm draws nearer, more and more people will tune into the weather report, even if it is bad news. Furthermore, the evidence of the truth of this story is now so overpowering that I trust my readers will have no choice but to accept it, all questions of sanity aside. If the village idiot says the bell has fallen from the steeple and comes dragging the bell behind him, well, lastly, I have discovered that this subject is not as complicated as it first appeared to be, and I am resolved to avoid the pitfall of trotting the usual convoluted path. What follows, therefore, will be the story of a crime and not a course on criminology. It was intended that this book would be half its present size and be completed in about 1 year. From the beginning, however, it took on a life force of its own, and I became but a servant to its will. It refused to stay within the confines prescribed, and, like the genie released from its bottle, grew to enormous size.
My bad, I was muted. So what you come to find, man, is that especially in this conspiracy shit, dog, a lot of shit. When they say the rabbit hole goes deep, bro, the rabbit hole truly goes deep, right? You research this stuff, and this is why a book like this, no matter what, anytime you're going to expose the truth, something that people would consider a conspiracy, right? It's going to be extremely difficult to keep it confound and, and keep it limited, because as you do the research, and usually people that have the mindset to take on a feat such as this, right? You're actually interested in the information. You're actually, studying the data. And what you're going to find is, okay, well, damn, this happened around this time. So this shit is related to this. So now you got to motherfucker go do some research on that. And then once you do the research on that, you find out that that is related to something else. So it's definitely a motherfucking ripple effect, right? Of information, correlation and causation for a lot of these things, man. Once you start doing the research again, this right here was due to, remember, played a part or was a result of the Titanic sinking. That's what people don't tell you, and you can find a lot of stuff on YouTube now, right? You can find a lot of stuff on YouTube now, telling you concerning how, I think it was either J.P. Morgan Chase or I want to say it's either J.P. Morgan Chase or what is, you got the Rockefellers, and what's the other one? What's the other big family? The Rockefellers and the Rothschilds. So it was either J.P. Morgan or Rockefeller or Rothschild, whichever one it was, right? Who was supposed to be on there, and they got sick and they didn't take the voyage. The other two people that were against and had the money that would be able to fight them from doing this went down with the ship. The guy that was the captain of the ship had ties to. You see what I'm saying? It was. I appreciate you, Darby. Yeah, J.P. Morgan. That's what. Thank you. All right. Shout out to Ancient Man in the building. Greatly appreciate you, brother, for the 5. To fight the Fed, get gold and silver while you can, and you don't have to buy an ounce of gold. You can just buy a gram, but please get some. Hey, man, I'm telling you, bro. Hey, Ancient Man, you know how sick I am, bro, because my dumb ass, especially being that I went to Dubai, for my birthday, and I just got this, and I didn't get no fucking like the little single grams of gold. I mean the ounces. I think they had like an ounce of gold. I'm so sick, bro. The increase from just what that would have been 2023 to now, crazy gold. And the thing is, they're still suppressing this shit, man. Listen, another thing too, I don't know if y'all know this shit, and we keep talking about it, and I'm gonna try to stick to this, but I gotta same thing with having these conversations, bro. All this shit, and this is why I say, listen, I don't trust Trump. I don't trust Elon Musk. I don't trust any of these upper level people because, we know, hey, two sides of the same coin. At the same time, though, just like in this situation, there are some people that's up there at the top that's not with the shits. Okay? Everybody that's powerful, that's why you have good and evil, right? So I think it's messed up when everybody says, okay, elected, selected, which I think that's a thing, right? I know for a fact we can, do enough stuff to prove that. But what I'm saying is every now and again, somebody gets in there that they cannot control. This is why you have assassinations. This is why you have smear campaigns. This is why you have certain things to try and threaten and scare the people into doing things. And most people, that's their life. Trump has all of the leverage because he's like about to be 80 or not 80 years old. He's a billionaire, incredibly rich, got hella connections around the world. Okay. And they can't play with him like they played with everybody else. The man that comes in with money and, you know what I'm saying? He didn't need to become president to get the $1 million speaking engagements and all these different things that the other presidents do, right? He already had the money. And I think what's come to be, and I guess this makes me a fucking Trump supporter now. I don't know. But this is just the way I see it. I think some people truly understand, and he said this shit, evil in high places. Remember, he was speaking cryptically in a lot of these things, man. And I just think he's not with the shits to the point of whatever. Oh, Israel. Yeah, I think it's certain roles and there's certain things you have to play and you still have to do. But I think there's a stopping point where you be like, nah, I'm not doing that shit. Not doing it. And when you have the right connections, you got enough shit going, I think, Think about this though. If he doesn't take a paycheck from you, does he really work for you? Well, $500 fine. I mean, you talking about like just meaning him giving his back his salary or what? Ray, what up, fam? What do you mean by the question? Darvell, I don't think. Listen, I don't think those people bought him though. I don't like I said. I don't think. I know he's not. I'm not just saying he's self-made, but he isn't like on some George Soros shit or funded by and built up by some outside entity. All his shit was him. We seen it happen. This wasn't a long. I don't think this wasn't a long game thing to where Donald Trump, even though it was on The Simpsons, was being paid all this money and doing all this shit, whatever, so he can become president. It just don't make sense. Yeah, it's crazy. But let's get back to it.
When the job was done and it was possible to assess the entire manuscript, I was surprised to realize that 4 books had been written instead of 1. First, there's a crash course on money, the basics of banking and currency. Without that, it would be impossible to understand the fraud that now passes for acceptable practice within the banking system. Second, there is a book on how the world's central banks, the Federal Reserve System being one of them, are catalysts for war. That is what.
Listen, I want to say Rothschild, the whatever the woman Rothschild was. She said, "My sons didn't want wars. There'd be no wars." Okay, when you look into the world wars and understand what they are, all of those things, bro. Central banks influence clearly. Okay, there's a lot of stuff on here for you to, again, don't take my word for shit, man. Just, I'm gonna say this. I have a new, and I told y'all this, I'm gonna just say it, I'm gonna repeat it, right? I have a newfound, I gained a newfound respect for ignorance is bliss, because once you understand something or you see something for what it really is, you can never look at it the same. And it really does kind of, take the fun out of a lot of shit, because you understand there's an ulterior motive, or there's puppet strings being pulled from behind the scenes that everybody else is unaware of, just completely, totally oblivious to. Right. So, if and when you decide to, all y'all that's here again, I don't know about a lot of people. That shout out to the people that's here tonight. I don't get the full audience, normal audience when I'm doing this, but all of y'all know, man, be careful with this stuff, dog. Okay, that's all I'm saying. Be careful, because I don't get depressed or whatever, but it does kind of damper a lot of the things, man, when you understand just how much of this shit, bro, is being controlled by them. You feel me?
Puts real fire into the subject, because it shows that we are dealing not with mere money, but with blood, human suffering, and freedom itself. Third, there's a history of central banking in America. That is essential to a realization that the concept behind the Federal Reserve was tried 3 times before in America. We need to know that, and especially need to know why those institutions were eventually junked. Finally, there is an analysis of the Federal Reserve itself and its dismal record since 1913. This is probably the least important part of all, but it is the reason we're here. It is the least important not because the subject lacks significance, but because it has been written before by writers far more qualified and more skilled than I. As mentioned previously, however, those volumes generally have remained unread except by technical historians, and the creature has continued to dine upon its hapless victims. There are 7 discernible threads that are woven throughout the fabric of this study. They represent the reason for abolition of the Federal Reserve System. When stated in their purest form, without embellishment or explanation, they sound absurd to the casual observer.
My bad. Shout out to Doug, man. Appreciate you for the fire, brother. Why would the Treasury lease out the power to issue and control the money system? Because the powerful people controlled it, and they bought the politicians. That's another thing too, man. Like you said, you got to understand these politicians, bro. It ain't just the president, dog. Okay, the president is the executive branch. The legislative is what really get the shit in there. Bro, all these Congress people and senators and shit, bro. This is why I think it needs to be term limits on those. They're far more impactful and devastating than the president. The president got limitations. Motherfucker being in Congress, hell, Maxine Ward has been in Congress, what, 30, 40 years?
It is the purpose of this book, however, to show that these statements are all too easy to substantiate. The Federal Reserve System should be abolished for the following reasons. It is incapable of accomplishing its stated objectives, Chapter 1. It is a cartel operating against the public interest, Chapter 3. It is the supreme instrument of usury, Chapter 10. It generates our most unfair tax, Chapter 10. It encourages war, Chapter 14. It destabilizes the economy, Chapter 23. It is an instrument of totalitarianism, Chapters 5 and 26. This is a story about limitless money and hidden global power. The good news is that it is as fascinating as any work of fiction could be, and this, I trust, will add both pleasure and excitement to the learning process. The bad news is that every detail of what follows is true. The Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin. Introduction. The following exchange was published in the British humor magazine, Punch, on April 3rd, 1957. It is reprinted here as an appropriate introduction and as a mental exercise to limber the mind for the material contained in this book. Question. What are banks for? Answer. To make money. Question. For the customers? Answer. For the banks. Question. Why doesn't bank advertising mention this? Answer. It would not be in good taste, but it is mentioned by implication in references to the reserves of $249 million or thereabouts. That is the money that they have made.
Now, listen, again, this is why it's FDIC insured. I think FDIC is what, up to $250,000, right, of your money. So if you have money, right, and the bank goes fucking bankrupt, but the bank motherfucking defaults, only $250,000 of your money is insured. This is why if you have a whole bunch of money, you have to motherfucking put the shit either in investments or across a whole bunch of banks. You know what I mean? I don't think even I ain't gonna say we, but most people don't even understand that once a person gets a certain level of wealth, bro, most of the smart ones, most of their assets are tied up in you know what I mean, in investments, man. Investments, because the more money you have in investments and in things and not actual tangible money, that means that's less taxable income. You feel me? You walk around with liquid money like that and so on and so forth, man. For one, it's not making you no money, because even, you know what, you get like 1% fucking APY or some shit in a bank account, a savings account, a high yield savings account. The most you're gonna cap out at is like maybe 3%, right? So what makes more sense? Keep your fucking hundreds of millions of, you know, or millions of dollars in a savings account, or put the shit into investment, stocks, real estate, crypto, all these different things, right? And again, this is 1957. So,
Question. Out of the customers? Answer. I suppose so. Question. They also mention assets of $500 million or thereabouts. Have they made that too? Answer. Not exactly. That is the money they use to make money. Question. I see. And they keep it in a safe somewhere? Answer. Not at all. They lend it to customers.
yeah, that's another thing too. A lot, bro. People don't even understand, bro. All them, bro. When they started, I remember this, because when I came in the Navy, there were no more checks, direct deposit, right? Direct deposit, right? Direct deposit, and what came with every motherfucking checking account post 2000. We actually lived through this shit, man. I'm really just thinking about this now. I didn't even, you know, and I'm pretty sure somebody else has said it, but it's just coming to me because I have, you know, I've been as an adult. You know what I'm saying? You ain't thinking about having to spend no money as a kid because, you know, but when we was kids, bro, you only had two options. Well, three. But, you know, I don't think the majority of people had credit cards back then. It was either check or actual money. Check or actual money. Wasn't no fucking debit cards, bro. Do you know how much flexibility the debit card gave the motherfucking bank now? When the fucking banks went digital, man, stop playing with me. Yeah. Shout out to Robert Platinum. FDIC's $250,000 limit is per depositor, per insured bank for each account ownership category. Yeah, everything was paper, bro. Now what though? You switch everything to a card, and you ain't even got to worry about the physical money no more. So now, what does that give the bank the ability to do?
Question. Then they haven't got it. Answer, well, no. Question, then how is it assets? Answer, they maintain that it would be if they got it back. Question, but they must have some money in a safe somewhere. Answer, yes, usually 500 million or thereabouts. That is called liabilities. Question, but if they've got it, how can they be liable for it? Answer, well, because it isn't theirs. Question, then why do they have it? Answer, it has been lent to them by customers. Question, you mean customers lend banks money? Answer, in effect, they put money into their accounts, so it is really lent to the banks. Question, and what do the banks do with it? Answer, they lend it to other customers. Question, but you said that money that they lent to other people was assets.
So again, remember, I meant to show y'all this too. I went into what was I looking for? I forget what I was looking for. I went into Whole Foods. Probably about 2 weeks ago. Whole Foods has the whole fucking cashless pay palm read shit now. Payment. Palm payment at fucking Whole Foods. Okay. We're getting closer and closer, bro. And again, this shit is, I don't want to say it's scary, but at the very least, it's uneasy. And bro, I just think over the next fucking 20 years, bro, the world's gonna change so drastically that this shit is really gonna be on some movie, TV show, cartoon type shit, bro. Yeah. Telling you.
Answer, yes. Question, then assets and liabilities must be the same thing. Answer, well, you can't really say that. Question, but you've just said it. If I put $100 into my account, the bank is liable to have to pay it back, so it's liabilities. But they go and lend it to someone else, and he is liable to have to pay it back, so it's assets. It's the same $100, isn't it? Answer, yes, but. Question, then it cancels out. It means, doesn't it, that banks haven't really any money at all? Answer, theoretically. Question, never mind theoretically. And if they haven't any money, where do they get their reserves of 249 million or thereabouts? Answer, I told you, that is the money they have made. Question, how? Answer, well, when they lend your $100 to someone, they charge him interest. Question, how much? Answer, it depends on the bank rate, say 5.
So look, so the banks are always gonna win. Why? Because as long as the interest they're charging you supersedes the interest that you can make by what? No, nothing less than, shit, 5 times, right? Or more. And everybody got to put their money in the bank at this point, or I say at least the majority of people. Ain't no more motherfucking, hiding money under the mattress or putting your shit in a safe, bro. No. You have to. That's another thing too. Tracking the money that people get. So they cut a check. You got to cash the check. The bank keeps a note of it. The IRS keeps a note of it. Right? If there's a certain amount of money that you spend, there's notes and shit taken of it. Oh, that's Mike. That's official. They're not making no more pennies in 2026 after 2026. Yeah, nobody uses pennies, man. Nobody uses pennies, bro. It costs more to make the pennies than what they worth. Shit happening right before our eyes, don't even know it.
5.5%, that's their profit. Question, why isn't it my profit? Isn't it?
Hey, $500 fine. They already doing it. $500 fine. Where did I go? I went to Turks. Came back from Turks. $500 fine. They didn't even especially if you use Clear. If you use Clear, they do eye recognition, bro. They're already doing iris scanners. At the fucking thing, they're doing facial recognition. You ain't even got to use your ID, bro. Yeah, the airport, Blue Jay. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, man. Yeah. All this shit is that what's the name shit? Um, what's they call it? The star thing on your ID, real ID. That real ID shit, bro. Database. And the thing is, like, at this point, dog, it's no. What's crazy is you can't fight it at this point, bro. Listen, even like this shit right here, dog. As much shit as we proven with, like, you can do this phone, nigga. Listen, I was looking at something. What was it? Whatever it was some arbitrary, right? Bro, do you know from my Google search that in Google and Meta is two totally separate things. But from my Google search, my motherfucking IG started showing me nothing but the shit that I searched on Google. That's how like cooked this shit is, bro. Every part of our life is being surveilled. Ring cameras, all that shit. Like, bro, it's like there is no going back without it being like a big ass EMP and killing all electronics and us having to start from scratch. That's the only way now. And now we're fucking dependent upon it. Screws, remember when we were saying this back where I think they finally came out and admitted it, or they were forced to admit it back in I want to say early 2010s. Because people were saying, hey man, I was motherfucking talking about hot dogs, and next thing I know, all these goddamn hot dog ads came up on my motherfucking phone, bro. Yeah, your mic on your phone is always on. Your camera on your phone is always on. Recording you, collecting data. Algorithms were being built before algorithms were a fucking thing, before it was a household word. $500 fine. That's who scared me. Listen, y'all talking about fucking Trump, man. Trump ain't got shit on Elon, bro. Y'all, bro, Elon is finna be, bro. Elon is literally, bro, doing interplanetary travel within the next 10 years. Elon is trying to fucking put people on another planet. Blue Jay, you got some you got some spyware, baby. You got some spyware on that phone, baby. That's all that is, Blue Jay. You got some spyware on that phone. Peter Thiel. I've heard that name, El Kabong. I'm trying to remember who that is though. I've heard that name, but I haven't heard it in a while. I'll look it up. Say no to cookies. Oh, you talking? Yeah. Bro, you can't though. Like, bro, reject cookies all you want, bro.
It's my money? Answer, it's the theory of banking practice that when I lend them my $100, why don't I charge them interest? Answer, well, you do. Question, you don't say. How much? It depends on the bank rate. Say 0.5%. Question, grasping of me, rather. Answer, but that's only if you're not going to draw the money out again. Question, but of course I'm going to draw it out again. If I hadn't wanted to draw it out again, I could have buried it in the garden, couldn't I? Answer, well, they wouldn't like you to draw it out again. Question, why not? If I keep it there, you say it's a liability. Wouldn't they be glad if I reduce their liabilities by removing it? Answer, no, because if you remove it, they can't lend it to anyone else. Question, but if I wanted to remove it, they'd have to let me. Answer, well, certainly. Question, but suppose they've already lent it to another customer. Answer, then they'll let you have someone else's money. Question, but suppose he wants his too, and they've let me have it. Answer, you're being purposely obtuse. Question, I think I'm being acute. What if everyone wanted their money at once? Answer, it's the theory of banking practice that they never would.
And when it did back in the day, it was called a bank run. So banks would do that to other banks being dirty, and they would say, hey man, I heard, Western banking is running short on money, and you know what I'm saying, they don't got enough money to pay the people the money that they actually got in the bank. what people would do was they would run to the fucking bank and withdraw their fucking money. And then within, a couple of days or so, because the bank has no money, the bank fucking goes bankrupt. The bank has to fucking close down because all the customers have removed their money. And usually what that bank does, the bank that started the rumor will either acquire them and absorb them or just let them go out of business and, replace them completely. It's crazy, man. This money game, bro, been running for forever. That's why I said the love of money is the root of all evil, bro. The love of money. Not money itself, the love of money, greed.
Question. So what banks bank on is not having to meet their commitments? Answer. I wouldn't say that. Question. Well, naturally. Well, if there's nothing else you think you can tell me. Answer. Quite so. Now you can go off and open a banking account. Question. Just one last question. Of course. Wouldn't I do better to go off and open up a bank? The New Jersey railway station was bitterly cold that night. Flurries of the year's first snow swirled around the streetlights. November wind rattled roof panels above the track shed and gave a long, mournful sound among the rafters. It was approaching 10 p.m., and the station was nearly empty, except for a few passengers scurrying to board the last southbound of the day. The rail equipment was typical for that year of 1910, mostly chair cars that converted into sleepers with cramped upper and lower berths. For those with limited funds, coach cars were coupled to the front. They would take the brunt of the engine's noise and smoke that somehow always managed to seep through unseen cracks. A dining car was placed between the sections as a subtle barrier between the two classes of travelers. By today's standards, the environment was drab. Chairs and mattresses were hard. Surfaces were metal or scarred wood. Colors were dark green and gray. In their hurry to board the train and escape the chill of the wind, few passengers noticed the activity at the far end of the platform. At a gate seldom used at this hour of the night was a spectacular sight. Nudged against the end rail bumper was a long car that caused those few who saw it to stop and stare. Its gleaming black paint was accented with polished brass handrails, knobs, frames, and filigrees. The shades were drawn, but through the open door one could see mahogany paneling, velvet drapes, plush armchairs, and a well-stocked bar. Porters with white serving coats were busying themselves with routine chores, and there was the distinct aroma of expensive cigars. Other cars in the station bore numbers on each end to distinguish them from their dull brothers. But numbers were not needed for this beauty. On the center of each side was a small plaque bearing a single word: Aldrich. The name of Nelson Aldrich, senator from Rhode Island, was well known even in New Jersey. By 1910, he was one of the most powerful men in Washington, D.C., and his private railway car often was seen at the New York and New Jersey rail terminals during frequent trips to Wall Street. Aldrich was far more than a senator. He was considered to be the political spokesman for big business. As an investment associate of J.P. Morgan, he had extensive holdings in banking, manufacturing, and public utilities. His son-in-law was John D. Rockefeller Jr. 60 years later, his grandson, Nelson Aldrich Rockefeller, would...
Now listen. So Aldrich, Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan. Aldrich, Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan. Rockefellers and Rothschilds will always end up in some shit. Anything that's got something to do with the hidden hand, the fucking, the people that are controlling the shit behind the scenes, bro. Rockefeller and Rothschilds go be in there. The two banks, like I said, I started fucking Chase Bank. You know what I'm saying? We never started doing the research of this shit, bro. You know what the fucking JP Morgan is. With JP Morgan and Chase, bro.
become vice president of the United States. When Aldrich arrived at the station, there was no doubt he was the commander of the private car, wearing a long...
Yes, he did, Blue Jay. Yep, we talked about that right before you got here. He was supposed to be on the Titanic, but he wasn't. And right soon after that, he ended up on Jekyll Island.
fur collared coat, a silky top hat, and carrying a silver-tipped walking stick, he strode briskly down the platform with his private secretary, Shelton, and a cluster of porters behind them, hauling assorted trunks and cases. No sooner had the senator boarded his car when several more passengers arrived with similar collections of luggage. The last man appeared just moments before the final "all aboard," and he was carrying a shotgun case. While Aldrich was easily recognized by most of the travelers who saw him stride through the station, the other faces were not familiar. These strangers had been instructed to arrive separately to avoid reporters, and should they meet inside the station, to pretend they did not know each other. After boarding the train, they had been told to use first names only, so as not to reveal each other's identity. As a result of these precautions, not even the private car porters and servants knew the names of these guests. Back at the main gate, there was a double blast from the engine's whistle. Suddenly, the gentle sensation of motion, the excitement of a journey begun. But no sooner had the train cleared the platform when it shuddered to a stop. Then, to everyone's surprise, it reversed direction and began.
People are literally having direct conversations with AI now and asking it for information or advice. It's a wrap for them. Bro, I think we're we're underestimating the power of belonging, right? Belonging, understanding, acceptance, shit like that. Human beings need that shit, man. And the fact that it's being replaced by AI, is being replaced by software, bro, it is extremely, extremely scary. But because again, everybody just wants to look at the shit on the surface, or everybody wants to look at the now and not worry about the later. And those of us that understand it, it's not enough of us to, you know what I'm saying? People like easy. People like to be comfortable. So, you know, if you can confide in AI, because excuse me, you can't afford actual therapy, right? You don't have any friends and things like that, and so on and so forth. What do you think people are gonna do? I think what Chat GPT is like what $20 a month or some shit. Ain't no therapist working for that.
Moving towards the station again. Had they forgotten something? Was there a problem with the engine? A sudden lurch and the slam of couplers gave the answer. They had picked up another car at the end of the train, possibly the mail car. In an instant, the forward motion was resumed, and all thoughts returned to the trip ahead and to the minimal comforts of the accommodations. And so, as the passengers drifted off to sleep that night to the rhythmic clicking of steel wheels against a rail, little did they dream that, riding in the car at the end of their train, were 7 men who represented an estimated 1/4 of the total wealth of the entire world. This was the roster of the Aldrich car that night. First, Nelson.
Listen, we gonna run that back.
And so, as the passengers drifted off to sleep that night to the rhythmic clicking of steel wheels against a rail, little did they dream that, riding in the car at the end of their train, were 7 men who represented an estimated 1/4 of the total wealth of the entire world.
1/4 of the world's wealth, bro. 25% of the fucking world. Between 7 men. You know what type of power that is?
This was the roster of the Aldrich car that night. First, Nelson W. Aldrich, Republican, quote, whip in the Senate, chairman of the National Monetary Commission, business associate of J.P. Morgan, father-in-law to John D. Rockefeller Jr. Abraham Piot Andrew, second, assistant secretary of the United States Treasury. Third, Frank A. Vanderlip, president of the National City Bank of New York, the most powerful of the banks at the time, representing William Rockefeller in the international investment banking house of Kuhn, Loeb and Company. Fourth, Henry P. Davidson, senior partner of the J.P. Morgan Company. 5, Charles D. Norton, president of J.P. Morgan's First National Bank of New York. 6, Benjamin Strong, head of J.P. Morgan's Bankers Trust Company. And 7, Paul M. Warburg, a partner in Kuhn, Loeb and Company, a representative of the Rothschild banking dynasty in England and France.
There you go, Rothschild. Now, of course, he's not a Rothschild, but a representative of the Rothschild family and the Rothschild empire.
And brother to Max Warburg, who was the head of Warburg Banking Consortium in Germany and the Netherlands. Concentration of wealth. Centralization of control over financial resources was far advanced by 1910. In the United States, there were two main focal points of this control, the Morgan Group and the Rockefeller Group. Within each orbit was a maze of commercial banks, acceptance banks, and investment firms. In Europe, the same process had proceeded even further and had coalesced into the Rothschild Group and the Warburg Group. An article appeared in the New York Times on May 3, 1931, commenting on the death of George Baker, one of Morgan's closest associates. It said, quote, 1/6 of the total wealth of the world was represented by members of the Jekyll Island Club, end quote. The reference was only to those in the Morgan Group, members of the Jekyll Island Club. It did not include the Rockefeller Group or the European financiers. When all of these are combined, the previous estimate that 1/4 of the world's wealth was represented by these groups is probably conservative. In 1913, the year that the Federal Reserve Act became law, a subcommittee of the House Committee on Currency and Banking under the chairmanship of Arsène Pujol of Louisiana completed its investigation into the concentration of financial power in the United States. Pujol was considered to be a spokesman for the oil interests, part of the very group under investigation, and did everything possible to sabotage the hearings. In spite of his efforts, however, the final report of the committee at large was devastating. Such was the nature of the wealth and power represented by those 7 men who gathered in secret that night and traveled in the luxury of Senator Aldrich's private car. Destination Jekyll Island. As the train neared its destination of Raleigh, North Carolina, the next afternoon, it slowed and then stopped in the switching yard just outside the station terminal. Quickly, the crew threw a switch and the engine nudged the last car onto a siding where, just as quickly, it was uncoupled and left behind. When passengers stepped onto the platform at the terminal a few moments later, their train appeared exactly as it had been when they boarded. They could not know that their traveling companions for the night, at the very instant, were joining still another train which within the hour would depart southbound once again. The elite group of financiers was embarked on a 1,000-mile journey that led them to Atlanta, then to Savannah, and finally to the small town of Brunswick, Georgia. At first, this would seem that Brunswick was an unlikely destination. Located on the Atlantic seaboard, it was primarily a fishing village with a small but lively port for cotton and lumber. It had a population of only a few thousand people. But by that time, the sea islands that sheltered the coast from South Carolina to Florida already had become popular as winter resorts for the very wealthy. One such island, just off the coast of Brunswick, had recently been purchased by J.P. Morgan and several of his business associates, and it was here that they came in the fall and winter to hunt ducks or deer. And
Jekyll Island was purchased by J.P. Morgan. So, what better place to stage the meeting that will fucking solidify your control of the fucking banking of the entire world?
to escape the rigors of cold weather in the north. It was called Jekyll Island. When the Aldrich car was uncoupled onto a siding at the small Brunswick.
Well, no, the president doesn't have any power over the Federal Reserve, though, Robert Platinum. That's the thing. It's his own entity. The Federal Reserve is like, hey, we do what the fuck we want to do, and that's why he can't fire the Fed chairman. He can't do anything to him. The Fed is something that works totally outside of America, even though America's, So the president don't got no control over the Fed, bro. None. Not one bit. Not one bit.
Station, it was indeed conspicuous. Word traveled quickly to the office of the town's weekly newspaper. While the group was waiting to be transferred to the dock, several people from the paper approached and began asking questions. Who were Mr. Aldrich's guests? Why were they here? Was there anything special happening? Mr. Davidson, who was one of the owners of Jekyll Island and who was well known to the local paper, told them that these were merely personal friends and that they had come for the simple amusement of duck hunting. Satisfied that there was no real news in the event, the reporters returned to their office. Even after arrival at the remote island lodge, the secretary continued. For 9 days, the rule for first names only remained in effect. Full-time caretakers and servants had been given vacation, and an entirely new, carefully screened staff was brought in for the occasion. This was done to make absolutely sure that none of the servants might recognize by sight the identities of these guests. It is difficult to imagine any event in history, including preparations for war, that was shielded from public view with greater mystery and secrecy. The purpose of this meeting on Jekyll Island.
Yeah, he appoints the chairman, but he can't fire him. He can't get rid of him.
Island was not to hunt ducks. Simply stated, it was to come to an agreement on the structure and operation of a banking cartel. The goal of the cartel, as is true with all of them, was to maximize profits by minimizing competition between members, to make it difficult for new competitors to enter the field, and to utilize the police power of government to enforce the cartel agreement. In more specific terms, the purpose and indeed the actual outcome of this meeting was to create the blueprint for the Federal Reserve System. The story is confirmed. For many years after the event, educators, commentators, and historians denied that the Jekyll Island meeting ever took place. Even now, the accepted view is that the meeting was relatively unimportant, and only paranoid unsophisticates would even try to make anything out of it. Ron Chernow writes, quote, the Jekyll Island meeting would be the fountain of 1,000 conspiracy theories, end quote. Little by little, however, the story has been pieced together in amazing detail, and it has come directly or indirectly from those who actually were there. Furthermore, if what they say about their own purposes and actions does not constitute a classic conspiracy, then there is little meaning to that word. The first leak regarding this meeting found its way into print in 1916. It appeared in Leslie's Weekly and was written by a young financial reporter by the name of B.C. Forbes, who later founded Forbes magazine. The article was primarily in praise of Paul Warburg, and it is likely that Warburg let the story out during a conversation with the writer. At any rate, the opening paragraph contained a dramatic but highly accurate summary of both the nature and purpose of the meeting.
Now, Forbes, you know, the brand that tracks all the money, tells us who the millionaires and billionaires and, you know, anything concerning money. Direct link to this. You see what I was talking about earlier, bro? To where once this shit start, bro, the web that's weaved, crazy.
Quote, picture a party of the nation's greatest bankers stealing out of New York on a private railroad car under cover of darkness, stealthily hiding hundreds of miles south, embarking on a mysterious launch, sneaking onto an island deserted by all but a few servants, living there a full week under such rigid secrecy that the names of not one of them was once mentioned, lest the servants learn the identity and disclose to the world this strangest, most secret expedition in the history of American finance. I'm not romancing, I'm giving to the world for the first time the real story of how the famous Aldrich Currency Report, the foundation of our new currency system, was written. In 1930, Paul Warburg wrote a massive book, 1,750 pages in all, entitled The Federal Reserve System, Its Original Growth. In this tome, he described the meeting and its purpose, but did not mention either location nor the names of those who attended. But he did say, quote, the results of the conference were entirely confidential. Even the fact that there had been a meeting was not permitted to become public, end quote. Then in a footnote he added, quote, though 18 years have since gone by, I do not feel free to give a description of most interesting conference concerning which Senator Aldrich pledged all participants to secrecy, end quote. An interesting insight to Paul Warburg's attendance at the Jekyll Island meeting came 34 years later in a book written by his son, James. James had been appointed by FDR as director of the budget and, during World War II, as head of the Office of War Information. In his book, he described how his father, who didn't know one end of a gun from the other, borrowed a shotgun from a friend and carried it with him to the train to disguise himself as a duck hunter. This part of the story was corroborated in the official biography of Senator Aldrich, written by Nathaniel Wright Stevenson. Quote, in the autumn of 1910, 6 men, in addition to Aldrich, went out to shoot ducks. That is to say, they told the world that was their purpose. Mr. Warburg, who was of the number, gives an amusing account of his feelings when he boarded a private car in Jersey City, bringing with him all the accoutrements of a duck shooter. The joke was in the fact that he had never shot a duck in his life and had no intention of shooting any. The duck shoot was a blind, end quote. Stevenson continues with a description of the encounter at Brunswick Station. He tells us that shortly after they arrived, the station master walked into the private car and shocked them by his apparent knowledge of the identities of everyone on board. To make matters worse, he said that a group of reporters were waiting outside. Davison took charge. Come outside, old man, he said, and I will tell you a story. No one claims to know what story was told standing on the railroad ties that morning, but a few moments later, Davison returned with a broad smile on his face. It's all right, he said, reassuringly. They won't give us away. Stevenson continues, quote, the rest is silence. The reporters dispersed, and the secret of the strange journey was not divulged. No one asked him how he managed it, and he didn't volunteer the information. In February 9th, 1935, issue of the Saturday Evening Post, an article appeared written by Frank Vanderlip. In it he said, quote, despite my views about the value to society of greater publicity for the affairs of corporations, there was an occasion, near the close of 1910, when I was as secretive, indeed as furtive, as any conspirator. I do not feel is any exaggeration to speak of our secret expedition to Jekyll Island as the occasion of the actual conception of what eventually became the Federal Reserve System.
Again, man. Conspiracies are real. How many times you gotta say this shit, man? All right. The first thing you understand, and I think is quite simple, but again, when you understand how people think, right, and how easily it is for people to be, they want to be accepted and not want to be looked at as weird, bro. So you don't challenge things. A lot of people don't challenge shit, bro. That's been one of the biggest issues and problems that I've always had is I ask why. Well, why? Why are we doing it this way? Why? Especially if it's inefficient or it doesn't make sense or it's unnecessary. Why? Why are we doing it like this? It's an easier way. If you can explain it to me and it makes sense, or maybe it's something I don't know and I don't see and I'm ignorant to, cool, fine. But I'm pretty good at figuring shit out. So if you give me a problem and I come up with a solution that's pretty much, extremely simple, why are we not doing it the more efficient way? Because I said so, because that's how I wanted it. No, I can't do that. Nah. You know what? I'm out. I can't do that. Okay. I'm not about to fucking stroke your ego and do unnecessary shit for the sake of, you know what I'm saying? Like, nah, we got a problem. Let's solve the problem. And then, kick back and fucking relax after we solve the problem. I'm not just going to, spend, countless hours doing some motherfucking shit for your satisfaction. Nah. Logan JJ, you ain't missed much, man. We just going over the creature from Jekyll Island. Yeah, yeah. That was the Rothschilds. That was the Rothschilds, man.
We were told to leave our last names behind us. We were told further that should we avoid dining together on the night of our departure, we were instructed to come one at a time and as unobtrusively as possible to the railway terminal on the New Jersey littoral of the Hudson, where Senator Aldrich's private car would be in readiness attached to the rear end of a train for the South. Once aboard the private car, we began to observe the taboo that had been fixed on our last names. We addressed one another as Ben, Paul, Nelson, Abe. It is Abraham, Piot, Andrew. Davidson and I adopted even deeper disguises, abandoning our first names. On the theory that we were always right, he became Wilbur and I became Orville after those two aviation pioneers, the Wright brothers. The servants and train crew may have known the identities of one or two of us, but they did not know all, and it was the names of all printed together that would have made our mysterious journey significant in Washington, in Wall Street, and even in London. Discovery, we knew, simply must not happen, or else all our time and effort would be wasted. If it were to be exposed publicly that our particular group had gotten together and written a banking bill, that bill would have no chance whatever of passage by Congress. End quote. The structure was pure cartel. The composition of the Jekyll Island meeting was a classic example of cartel structure. A cartel is a group of independent businesses which join together to coordinate the production, pricing, or marketing of their members. The purpose of a cartel is to reduce competition and thereby increase profitability. This is accomplished through a shared monopoly over their industry, which forces the public to pay higher prices for their goods or services than would be otherwise required under free enterprise competition. Here were representatives of the world's leading banking consortia: Morgan, Rockefeller, Rothschild, Warburg, and Kuhn Loeb. They were often competitors, and there is little doubt that there was a considerable distrust between them and skillful maneuvering for favored position in any agreement. But they were driven together by one overriding desire to fight their common enemy, and that enemy was competition. In 1910, the number of banks in the United States was growing at a phenomenal rate. In fact, it had more than doubled to over 20,000 in just the previous 10 years. Furthermore, most of them were springing up in the South and the West, causing the New York banks to suffer a steady decline of market share. Almost all the banks in the 1880s were national banks, which means they were chartered by the federal government. Generally, they were located in the big cities and were allowed by law to issue their own currency in the form of banknotes. Even as early as 1896, however, the number of non-national banks had grown to 61%, and they already had 54% of the country's total banking deposits. By 1913, when the Federal Reserve Act was passed, those numbers were 71%, non-national banks holding 57% of the deposits. In the eyes of those duck hunters from New York, this was a trend that simply had to be reversed. Competition also was coming from a new trend in industry to finance future growth out of profits rather than.
Remember, told you, um, banking is some of the dirtiest fucking business ever, dog. On all sides, between other banks and on the customers, is extremely predatory, right? Extremely predatory, man. Hey, you don't got enough money. Hey, we'll give it to you. We'll lend it to you. It's gonna cost you though. And they know for the most part, a lot of people, possibly even most, don't know how to manage money, don't make enough money to, sufficiently pay it back. So now you got a fucking debt slave. And this is why I talk about, debt slavery is a real thing, man. The reason why you working every day, checking into that 9 to 5, you know, is because you need to live. So if your means are not being met, right? Now what? Now you gotta go to the bank and ask for the money that you don't make, and now you in debt to the motherfucking bank to pay the money back for life. And now you working until you fucking die because you got it. You know what I mean? So this is why it's very, very important, man. Financial literacy and living at or below your means, right? But that's the American way, and that was what they wanted out of this thing, man. That's what they wanted. They wanted the people to be irresponsible. They wanted the people to be financially illiterate. There's a reason why they stopped teaching economics in school. Okay.
From borrowed capital. This was the outgrowth of free market interest rates, which set a realistic balance between debt and thrift. Rates were low enough to attract serious borrowers who were confident of the success of their business ventures and of their ability to repay, but they were high enough to discourage loans.
Discover just got absorbed by, I want to say, MasterCard. I think Discover got absorbed by either MasterCard or Visa, one of the two. But there ain't no more Discover no more. Discover just got bought out. Capital One. There we go. Appreciate it, Rob Platinum. Discover just got bought out by fucking Capital One. So even, like I said, even a lot of the legacy, you know what I mean, is getting absorbed.
For frivolous ventures or those for which there were alternative sources of funding. For example, one's own capital. That balance between debt and thrift was the result of a limited money supply. Banks could create loans in excess of their actual deposits, as we shall see, but there was a limit to that process. And that limit was ultimately determined by the supply of gold they held. Consequently, between 1900 and 1910, 70% of the funding for American corporate growth was generated internally, making industry increasingly independent of the banks. Even the federal government was becoming thrifty. It had a growing stockpile of gold, was systematically redeeming the greenbacks, which had been issued during the Civil War, and was rapidly reducing the national debt. Here was another trend that had to be halted. What the bankers wanted, and what many businessmen wanted also, was to intervene in the free market and tip the balance of interest rates downward to favor debt over thrift. To accomplish this,
Again, man, this is why they need America and the rest of the world, but especially America, in debt, right? Because America's in debt. In order to get out of debt, what? You got to raise taxes. You got to charge more for goods. You know what I mean? You got to make it more difficult for fucking the citizens. So if you make it more difficult for the citizens, what is it? Who do the citizens have to run to? The banks, credit cards, loans, and the predatory motherfucking, it never ends, man. The wheel never ends. It never stops.
the money supply simply had to be disconnected from gold and made more plentiful.
Nah, I don't agree with that, El Kabong. Well, no, you know what, El Kabong? That's what I'm saying too. So it being one, that's the globalism. So the globalism thing is that, hey, one fucking control for everybody. So eventually the ideal outcome is one bank, one government, one world. I don't know if we're gonna live to see that though. I don't know if we're gonna if it is, it'll probably be at the end of our lifetimes. But yeah, I don't see that happening in our lifetime for the most part. Yeah, that's crazy. A Kamala Harris president thing is crazy.
Or as they described it, more elastic. The specter of bank failure. The greatest threat, however, came not from rivals or private capital formation, but from the public at large in the form of what bankers call a run on the bank. This is because when banks accept a customer's deposit, they give in return a balance in his account. This is the equivalent of a promise to pay back the deposit anytime he wants. Likewise, when another customer borrows money from the bank, he also is given an account balance, which usually is withdrawn immediately to satisfy the purpose of the loan. This creates a ticking time bomb because at the point the bank has issued more promises to pay on demand than it has money in the vault. Even though the depositing customer thinks he can get his money at any time he wants, in reality it has been given to the borrowing customer and no longer is available at the bank. The problem is compounded further by the fact that banks are allowed to loan even more money than they have received in deposit. The mechanism for accomplishing this seemingly impossible feat will be described in a later chapter, but it is a fact of modern banking that promises to pay often exceed savings deposits by a factor of 1 to 10. And because only about 3% of these accounts are actually retained in the vault in the form of cash, the rest having been put into even more loans and investments, the bank's promises exceed its ability to keep those promises by a factor of over 300 to 1.
Again, this is what we saw happen in the crash in 2008, right? This is what happened in the recession. We witnessed that shit. That's another thing I think we bro, I remember that shit, dog. Motherfucking gas was like damn near $5 a gallon. Everything was high. No money. Nobody had money. Fucking housing market was in the fucking dumps. Like the country was upside down, man, when it came to money, bro. And lo and behold, that shit is going to hit again. Make sure your shit is right, bro. All right. You definitely need to have something for a rainy day. You definitely need to have something, you know what I mean? But that shit, when it hit this time, bro, it's gonna be 1,000 times worse. And what I see happening, I think I see happening is Trump is just trying to delay this shit so it's not on his watch as much as he possibly can.
As long as only a small percentage of depositors request their money at one time, no one is the wiser. But if public confidence is shaken, and if more than a few percent attempt to withdraw their funds, the scheme is finally exposed. The bank cannot keep all its promises and is forced to close its doors. Bankruptcy usually follows in due course.
This is what I explained earlier about bank runs, and this is a tactic you used back in the 1800s and shit, right?
Currency drains. The same result could happen, and prior to the Federal Reserve System often did happen, even without depositors making a run on the bank. Instead of withdrawing their funds at the teller's window, they simply wrote checks to purchase goods or services. People receiving those checks took them to a bank for deposit. If that bank happened to be in the same one from which the check was drawn, then all was well, because it was not necessary to remove any real money from the vault. But if the holder of the check took it to another bank, it was quickly passed back to the issuing bank and settlement was demanded between banks. This is not a one-way street, however. While the downtown bank is demanding payment from the uptown bank is also clearing checks and demanding payment from the downtown bank. As long as the money flow in both directions is equal, then everything can be handled with the simple bookkeeping. But if the flow is not equal, then one of the banks will have to actually send money to the other to make up the difference. If the amount of money required exceeds a few percentage points of the bank's total deposits, the result is the same as a run on the bank by depositors. This demand of money by other banks rather than by depositors is called currency drain. In 1910, the most common cause of a bank having to declare bankruptcy due to a currency drain was that it followed a loan policy that was more reckless than that of its competitors. More money was demanded from it because more money was loaned by it. It was dangerous enough to loan 90% of their customers' savings, keeping only $1 in reserve out of every 10, but that had proven to be adequate most of the time. Some banks, however, were tempted to walk even closer to the precipice. They pushed the ratio to 92%, 95%, 99%. After all, the way a bank makes its money is to collect interest, and the only way to do that is to make loans. The more loans, the better. And so there was a practice among some of the more reckless banks to loan up, as they call it, which was another way of saying to push down their reserve ratios. Beggar's utopia. If all the banks could be forced to issue loans in the same ratio to their reserves as other banks did, then regardless of how small that ratio was, the amount of checks to be cleared between them would balance in the long run. No major currency drains would ever occur. The entire banking industry might collapse under such a system, but not individual banks. At least not those who were part of the cartel. All would walk the same distance from the edge, regardless of how close it was. Under such uniformity, no individual bank could be blamed for failure to meet its obligations. The blame could be shifted instead to the economy, or to government policy, or interest rates, or trade deficits, or the exchange value of the dollar, or even to the capitalist system itself.
So basically, it's running down all of the explanations as to how and why the bank operates the way it operates. Let me jump forward.
In these treatises, Warburg complained that the American monetary system was crippled by its dependency on gold and government bonds, both of which were in limited supply. What America needed, he argued, was an elastic money supply that could be expanded and contracted to accommodate the fluctuating needs of commerce. The solution, he said, was to follow the German example, whereby banks could create currency solely on the basis of commercial paper, which is banker language for IOUs from corporations. Warburg was tireless in his efforts. He was featured as a speaker before scores of influential audiences and wrote a steady stream of published articles on the subject. In March of that year, for example, the New York Times published an 11-part series written by Warburg explaining and expounding what he called the Reserve Bank of the United States. The message was plain for those who understood. Most of Warburg's writing and lecturing on this topic was eyewash for the public. To cover the fact that a central bank is merely a cartel which has been legalized, its proponents had to lay down a thick smokescreen of technical jargon, focusing always on how it would supposedly benefit commerce, the public, and the nation.
And that's another thing too, man. Once you start understanding that there's a whole nother language out here from a legal perspective, so shit is hidden in plain sight, right? This is why you need a lawyer to look over contracts for the most part and all these different things if you don't learn it yourself. But yeah, man, this whole money situation and ain't no money, right? It's just promises to pay, debt, credit, all this shit, so on and so forth, right? And it all started here. We'll stop here on this one for tonight. But like I said, we'll pick it up and we'll continue as we go along, man. But yeah, hey, appreciate y'all pull up on me, bro. It's fantastic 824 on all social media platforms. Another Truth Tuesdays, because you know we can't say the other word in the books, man. All right, I'm out.